Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for another beautiful, beautiful conversation here on The Remedy. It took exactly 1 year of protesting American policing, 2 days of jury deliberation, and a 14-day trial to finally, um, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all counts for the murder of George Floyd. So, this hour, we are going to discuss what the verdict means for the Black community and whether or not the discussion or whether or not this decision could signal effective change in policing and racial disparities in the criminal justice system. During our conversation, we also would like to focus on the effects of the trauma stemming from the trial of the continued killings and deaths of Black and Brown bodies at the hands of state violence. So it's going to be a good one. Our guest today, I'm delighted to have our team. Let me switch screen real quick. Um, Good morning, guys. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are we doing today?
Good.
Good.
Are you guys ready for another beautiful show?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I am. I am surrounded. I'm the only male here. I just realized that.
So you got to be on your best behavior.
That's right.
I have to. Well, I wanna take a moment to Pat. Let's start with you. This is our scientist, Pat. Um, Tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life. A little bit. She can write a book. Okay? A little bit about what's going on.
Always in a dissertation mode. Things are good.
Yeah.
We're good. We're doing well. Weather's getting better. So good.
Good. And Cynthia, same question. How are you?
This week was a bit rough. Was it on Thursday? I found out one former client. She's 15. She went missing on the 5th of April, and they found her body earlier Thursday morning, and she was killed by people she knew.
Wow.
And thankfully, they caught, the person that did it. So, my hearts go out to the family, but
That is hard.
I guess it's the nature of when you work for a state agency, you have that aspect of the job where your client successfully completes something, and then the behavior continues, and then certain thing it can go from good to worse in a minute. So
I can imagine.
But besides that, all is well.
Yeah. For those who are watching us for the very first time and don't know who Cynthia is, she's also a social worker in South Carolina.
Woo!
Speaking about Miss Amina is joining us today for the very first time. She's a mental therapist, licensed social worker. She's also in charge of. Amina, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let me start.
So yes, I am a licensed social worker. I am originally from the beautiful country Africa, Liberia, West Africa. I moved to New York and then found myself in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I love helping people. I love helping people live life to their fullest, whatever that looks like for them. And so currently I am the founder and CEO of Candor Consulting Firm, where we do clinical and coaching. And so we have worked with so many different people in terms of individual counseling, couples counseling, family counseling. And then we work uniquely with different organizations to help teach them leadership styles. And currently we're working on a project to help churches become emotionally healthy. And so what that looks like depends on the church, as well as how do we assess their members to figure out what the need is and then provide them with what they need. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I've had a ton of highlights than lowlights this week. So.
All right. Well, thank you for being here.
I do have a question for Amina. What does the LMSW stand for?
Licensed Master Social Worker.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and the P and the A next to my name stands for Pennsylvania.
That's not even.
Why are you so lame, Monday? Why?
Monday, I'm going to keep an eye out for those letters.
And last and not least, we would like to introduce to everyone Miss Dionne Kelly. Dionne, thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Okay, so I was born in the beautiful island of Barbados. I'm from the West Indies, and so that is where I'm from. I moved to Brooklyn, New York at a very young age. So Brooklyn basically raised me, the best place on earth. I went to college in New York. I went to law school in New Jersey. I went to Seton Hall.
Ooh, and my school.
Yes. We are definitely on a different level. Definitely on a different level. And I moved to North Carolina in 2012. I am currently in Charlotte. I am in-house counsel, associate general counsel for a large healthcare company here in Charlotte. And so I'm very familiar with the clinical side of things and litigation from that perspective. Prior to that, though, I was a criminal litigator for 10 years. So I have extensive experience and courtroom experience in criminal law.
Wow.
Welcome.
This is a heavy team this morning. Yes. Heavy team for a heavy conversation, I must say. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Well, we're gonna just jump right in. This is again a conversation. Some of the questions goes directly to Diane. The first part of the show, we're gonna talk about the perhaps the legal aspect of what we want to understand, and then the second part of the show, we will look at the psychological aspect of and the trauma associated with this conversation. So right off the bat, Diane. Dionne, thank you so much. Listen, I do butcher people's name for some reason. I am famous for it. So, tell us a little bit about do you think that the Chauvin trial will change how prosecutors charge and prosecute cases going forward? Bring us back. I know it's been a while, and some people are probably wondering why on earth are we even talking about this again. And me personally, I'm glad you asked, because this is why. I feel personally that Black people, we can't breathe, if I want to use that. And every time we try to breathe, there's another shooting of another Black person. If you recall, March 29 with the police shooting gun down that took place, where a 13-year-old Mexican American child was killed. On April 11, police shot and killed a 20-year-old, I think, Dante Wright, a Black man, and that was during a traffic stop. Okay. Makia Bryant, a 16-year-old girl, who got shot back on April 20th. Whether or not that shooting was justified or not, that's not what we are saying here. All I'm saying is, we just can't get a break. Every time we think we can take a breath, here we are again dealing with the same scenario, the same question. So that's why we are talking about it again today. And I'm sorry if you feel like that's all we do, but guess what? If we don't do it, who will? That's the way I feel. Like if it's happening, then we need to continue that conversation, because we have children growing up in this country. One of the questions I'm going to ask a minute later is, how do I speak to a 5 and 6-year-old who watch these things and now are fearful once in a while? I remember growing up, for me personally, when we used to think about police officers, we always, as a kid, thought, if I ever get lost, all I need to do is go to see a police officer and they'll bring me home or whatever. Our conception of a police officer has changed completely. And so this is the world that they are now living in, and we have to train them. We have to train our kids to understand what that look like and help them to deal with what's happening in their world. So we'll come back to that, but let's go back to Miss Dionne. Tell us a little bit about what's happening, what you think based on on the outcome of the case.
Okay. And I think I'll start the conversation just piggying back on something that you said. The trial part is complete, but we still haven't had sentencing. We're still weeks away from sentencing. And so we are still very much in the midst and in the middle of this Derek Chauvin trial. So it's not like everything is done. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, we are still living this. And sentencing is going to have long-term implications as well as to how things happen moving forward. What I wanted to backtrack and talk about this trial is it is so uncommon for police officers to be tried and convicted of crimes like these, right? We had this situation in the murder of George Floyd, where we had every vantage point. We had surveillance videos, we had eyewitnesses. And in order for the prosecution to secure a conviction, which they did a very good job in presenting this case overall, they needed numerous eyewitness testimonies. They needed 6 medical experts, right? And they had multiple law enforcement officers that testified as well. So it just goes to show you the magnitude of the evidence that was necessary to be presented in order to secure this conviction. And so I am very happy that we have a conviction, but I really want the audience to keep this in proper perspective. The prosecution put everything out there to secure this conviction. And so what does that mean? I think this verdict is definitely step one in probably 100 or 1,000 steps moving forward. What we deal with is our system is permeated with behavior, right, that has been condoned over a significant period of time. And so with that said, I don't think one verdict itself will just change the concept or change the mind frame or the thinking of law enforcement, right? I think this needs to be a continuous occurrence where now what's being permeated is you're not going to kill Black and brown men and women with impunity. You will be held accountable when you act in such a callous manner, right? So I definitely think it is a step in the right direction. I think there's a lot that needs to be done moving forward, just as far as our laws and legislation that needs to be in place in order to kind of implement the ideal that comes out of a guilty conviction. As far as the question about prosecutors, whether or not they would change how they charge these cases. So what people have to understand is that we are in a position now where this is kind of a bit of uncharted territory. Mr. Floyd was not the first individual that was killed by law enforcement. And unfortunately, we have seen even post his verdict that he will not be the last, right? And so when you have a history of non-conviction of police officers, it is a much harder publicly in how prosecutors think about these cases. Now, I'm not here to say whether or not they should, take certain things into account, but they always look at these cases a little different. And let me flip this on its head. If this was a regular citizen that committed this crime and we had the video camera, I believe we would have probably had a first-degree murder charge, right? because the only difference between first degree and the varying degrees of murder is premeditation. And the law says premeditation is basically a thought process, a planning to carry out these actions. But premeditation can happen in a few seconds. It can happen in an instant, right? And so when you analyze the facts of this case, you don't need to plan a week in advance, a day in advance. You can be walking down the street and make up your mind to kill. And prosecutors have brought forth murder cases on theories where it was a quick decision. But I think because we have a system that has been built and kind of developed on the non-prosecution of law enforcement, prosecutors look at these cases, with a bit of a different eye. I think the better question is, should they? Probably not. But there's a lot of social implications when you bring criminal charges against a police officer.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dionne. Another question to piggyback. If a prosecutor's office, if a prosecutor has a working relationship with the police department, can they be trusted to prosecute police officers objectively? I'm saying that because there are times, and I've heard it before, where you're going through a case and you're told by the attorney, stick within your area or stick within a certain jurisdiction, because the attorney knows how that judge works. The attorney has a relationship with that judge and feels kind of like comfortable. So there's definitely a level of comfortability that can work for people and against people. So what's the conflict of interest there in terms of that?
Okay. And I can directly answer this question because I also was a former prosecutor, and I worked very closely with law enforcement to develop my cases and try cases. So there is a relationship between the prosecutor's office and law enforcement that you cannot remove or you cannot detach, right? They work hand in hand. I think whether or not there is a level of objectivity depends on the individual prosecutor, and it should not, but that is the reality of it. I know for me as a prosecutor, I had a really good and solid working relationship with my officers, but they also understood for me that I am only pursuing a case that is grounded in evidence. I am only pursuing a case, that is legitimate, that does not violate constitutional provisions that every defendant is entitled to. And so I analyze each case individually. If procedure was followed, we had the evidence, we go forward. A lot of prosecutors, well, no, let me not say that. Some prosecutors sometimes cannot detach the personal relationship that they have with law enforcement, which is a natural part of the job, and being able to say no. I have had cases where I dismissed cases because there was insufficient evidence. There were major violations, right? And I had no issue with saying no, because while they gather the evidence, ultimately the discretion rests with me as the prosecutor as to whether I will try the case, whether I will bring the case. And so I think the objectivity piece is really individual. Unfortunately, you're not going to have prosecutors that feel the same. When I took my oath of office to become a prosecutor, part of it said, you ensure that justice happens. And the only way you do that, in my opinion, is to look at these cases neutrally. I don't care how close we are. We could have had a working relationship for 10 years. If it is not adding up, if there is a violation, I will not prosecute the case. And so I think that's where we vary, because people are different. Ideologically, as a Black woman, my view and worldview is different from potentially a white male counterpart, right? Not saying that my worldview is better. I'm saying it is different. And my experiences are different, which guides how I deal with these cases.
Thanks, Dionne. I applaud your ethical values and discretion. It's a fine line. It's really a fine line. This is someone that I'm sure, they go to each other's barbecue, they know each other's kids, they know each other's families. So it's really a fine line as to what the prosecutor decides to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Cynthia, do you have a question for Dionne?
Sure. So Dionne, my question to you is, should state attorney general or federal prosecutor handle a case such as just George Floyd, or as opposed to the district attorney itself? You think should the big guns come in a case like that has such media outlet?
So in this case, in Derek Chauvin's trial, it was the attorney general's office. And the reason why, people step outside your local government, your local attorneys, is because you want somebody that is essentially detached, right? Who can be neutral, who can come in and look at these facts and say, you know what, I can prosecute based on the information I have, as opposed to not prosecuting based on the relationship a district attorney may have with the individual. So I am all for an independent party handling these cases. As far as state and federal, I'm really glad you brought up that question because I think it's a good teaching point. So each state in the United States, the 50 states, there are individual sovereigns. So basically what that means is I can commit a crime in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the state of North Carolina will prosecute me. But let's say, as in this case, Derek Chauvin, because the federal government is actually thinking about bringing civil rights charges against Chauvin. So because the federal government is a separate entity, right? They're not intertwined with the state. He will have his criminal conviction, which he has right now, and the feds on their own, separate and apart from the criminal case, they can bring civil rights violations. And let me clarify, civil rights violations, that is a civil case, and the state brought the criminal charges against Mr. Chauvin. And so I think it's really good for people to understand there is no issue with double jeopardy in a case like this, because the state can prosecute, and the federal government, if there are certain violations based on their investigation, they can also prosecute based on the same occurrence.
So
go ahead.
Sorry, Patty. I believe, I forgot his name, the guy who was jogging in Georgia and they shot and killed
Ahmaud Arbery.
Yes, they brought, I think they brought not civil, but the federal government charged them with heinous, like a violation of his civil right, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so my question to you, Dionne, would you think that because it was the first police officer in Minnesota who was charged of such a crime as this Floyd case, do you think that can bring some light to other police in different states and different cities to try to do community policing the way it should be? Because I have a problem with, different communities have different needs. So when a community needs something and you bring the people or the police that bring so much division within them, I think there should be a different way to have police community policing. So people in that community can see, okay, I know you're in authority, but you look like me in that sense, that you can understand the struggle. So, overall, is it that verdict can actually bring that conversation in different cities, different states, so people can, community policing can look different in different communities?
I think what the verdict does, at the very least for right now, is it catches the attention of law enforcement, right? When you go from having a history of being shielded from criminal liability, right? Non-convictions, not guilties, however you have it. now you start to feel a little shift in the atmosphere, because now there is a possibility, right, that I can be tried. There is a possibility that I can be convicted. I think at a deeper level, this is a criminal conviction. At the foundation of the issue, or these policies and procedures that some law enforcement agencies have in place that perpetuate this behavior, right? That perpetuates the racial profiling of Black men at alarming rates, right? And it perpetuates this idea that violence is necessary. I think there's a lot of internal cleaning that needs to happen based on this conviction, because now, it's not just business as usual, right? Yeah. Now we at least have something to point to say, look, you cannot act and continue to treat Black and brown bodies like target practice, because you can be prosecuted and you can be convicted potentially, right? I think as far as community policing, and I think this is a really big conversation, because we cannot negate the fact that a lot of law enforcement, they are working in communities that they are completely detached from. They have no idea what it is to live in the inner city of a city like Philly, of a city like Brooklyn, right? A lot of the times, law enforcement, they're coming from elsewhere, and they're coming into work, and then they clock out and they go back to their bubble. And so I definitely think the conversation has to center around, okay, what can we do to shift the way we police neighborhoods where there's no knowledge, right? There needs to be training. I think there needs to be more visibility. The only time law enforcement interacts in most of our communities is when bad things happen.
Agreed.
Right? So we don't even know what our law enforcement looks like just on a community level.
Never. No.
Sometimes they're not coming to our community events, our block parties, and this is not across the board, because some communities do, but the first time we see them are in moments of trauma. Yeah. We also need to analyze whether or not policing can be coupled with, like we have Armina here today, mental health professionals, right? Will that help in de-escalation tactics? Not every 911 call is a call that is crime related. There are mental health issues at play. And I feel like our communities are not, we're just not having the interaction. Officers don't know our dynamics. And so it creates this breeding ground of violations, of killing. So I definitely think this pushes the conversation to the forefront. Whether or not these conversations will be had across the board, that's yet to be seen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my last question for you. I'm glad you brought this up, Dionne. Like, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago in my place of work, a child came into care. When I say into care, he came into foster care. He was 6'5", he's 17, he's 15 years old, 6'5", 200 and something pounds. And he was having a crisis. It's amazing. We are social workers, but nobody could calm him down. And guess who they call? Not law enforcement. And I'm like, okay, he's 6'5", he's 200 and something pounds, he's Black. They're not seeing that he's in the middle of a crisis, that the minute he see the police, what do you think he's gonna do? He's gonna charge, or he's gonna react. I'm like, what was the whole point? And I think somebody saw that and they stopped and said, no, let's handle it, because we didn't want him to run away. Like, really, guys? We are social workers, really.
And you want to know what's so hard about situations like that? Our skin color.
Oh, wow. I guess internet drop. She's back.
I'm not sure what was missed, but I'll start over. The problem we have with that is our skin color is weaponized, right? So I see my fellow brothers and sisters as the human beings and with the respect and dignity that I would give all individuals, right? A lot of the times law enforcement sees us as an automatic threat.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, like in that situation, I would be so fearful because now you have a baby. He's only 15 years old, but he's 6'5", he's 200 pounds. He's a big Black guy.
Yeah.
And for some reason, when you're a big Black guy, or even a Black guy or a Black woman, there's this tension that is automatically created, which is really, really sad. And what I really want to put out there is this verdict. I mean, I was super excited about it. I was happy about the verdict, but this verdict will not cure racism.
No.
There is racism that is embedded in our system that 200 guilty verdicts will not rectify. You can't train away racism. You have to eliminate it, right? And I feel like we have to come to that place in law enforcement. There are a lot of good officers out there, right? I work with them. They're in my family. I respect them. But you have criminals who wear uniform. So that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. And to say something real quick on what Dionne has said, very well said, it's definitely about reconceptualizing. It's literally the way that they see us, Black, brown people, because when you close your eyes, like in the movie A Time to Kill, if it's a different shade, would you act the same? And it just, unfortunately, that's how they vision us. And that whole paradigm needs to come down and be shifted, reformed with the company, with the actually community, so then we can build trust again, because in the same token, we don't trust. So when we see them as well, automatically we're like, oh my God, we're in trouble, when it's not supposed to be that. As Pastor D stated, as a kid, cops were supposed to go who you go to for something good. That's what I taught my kids at the beginning. However, when they became teenagers, I had to sit them down as Black kids and said, okay, now, this is different. They had their Caucasian friend, and I'm like saying to my son, always let your Caucasian friend drive. Why, Mom? Because if he gets pulled over, you next to him, the outcome is less than if it's the other way around. And that's a problem. So I agree with you. I think we all were thrilled, but it's just the beginning. And we need to continuously bring that transparency, bring that visibility. And as you mentioned, Dionne, the whole conceptualization of policies. Those policies need to be changed, and the business within that unit needs to start holding people accountable for these policies. It's not a matter of we have the policies, we have new policies, you check it off, but then we still continue the old way. So it's a whole lot of re-education. And I, for myself, I will do what I need to do to help that process, because it's a two-pronged thing. Because if they're trying to change and we see them the old way, it's not going to work either. So I will definitely do my end, but it needs, and that transparency to us, that education to us, need to be visibly available, so that we don't see them as only the time when there's something bad and they're the bad guy. It's a two-pronged approach.
But the other thing too is that it's not, like you said, Patty, it's not one-sided, but also when we, Monday, you said you were going to ask me a question about children. I'm just going to jump in and say, it's not a blanket teaching, right? Meaning we're not teaching them that all whites are this way or all Blacks are this way, because I want my daughter to approach a police officer. I want my son to approach a police officer if they're in trouble. Yes, we have to give them caveats. We have to, we have to say, this is how you do it. This is what you say. This is how you should act, which is different than most of our counterparties, right? Because I don't know that my Caucasian neighbor is sitting down with her kids and giving them the same speech or the same teaching. And so it makes it very difficult for us as Black and brown people to not be paranoid as we leave our houses as we enter into the world, as we send our children out into the world, because it is such an uncertainty time now, amongst other things, but including with race. And so, this is a very needed conversation, and this is how we make changes. We have to keep talking about it. We cannot just mute the TV when it comes on. We can't just decide not to have these conversations. We have to be in the forefront, educating people about it, reading about it, because the issue of racism is not a 2021. It's not a 1986. This goes back further before any of us on this platform was even born. And so we have this history that continues to sort of plague us as we go along. I call this like the sore or the cut that never heals. We keep changing the Band-Aid. We may put Neosporin on it and then put a new Band-Aid on it, but every now and then something happens, the adhesiveness of the Band-Aid wears off and the cut is back to being exposed and even infected. And so this is a great time to continue to talk about these things.
And I have to say, part of the healing is to be able to look at ourselves as well and figure out what are we doing to eliminate some of the. Let me put it this way, and I'm glad Pat mentions it. We have our parts to play, just as the police department, they have their work to do as well. But unfortunately, Amanda, when you talk about that Band-Aid or when you talk about that cuts that refuse to heal, I feel that for me personally, every time that I'm ready to begin the healing process, I witnessed something else, and all of a sudden that Band-Aid got ripped out, and the wound just get infected all over again. So it's like, and that's the reason why I feel that this conversation, we need to keep having it, because again, I have to say this, I don't believe that police officers are the enemy. I believe that criminals who dressed up in police uniforms, they are the enemies. And unfortunately, when we see them, we don't know which is which until they behave. And I'm going to show you a quick little video to kind of explain what I'm saying, because again, a police officer will act a certain way. A criminal will do something different. I'm going to play just this video for you, and then we'll be right.
Developing this morning in the state of Virginia, the governor there is calling for an independent investigation after the release of a disturbing police body cam video. It shows officers drawing their guns on an Army lieutenant in uniform and pepper spraying him during a traffic stop that took place last December. That Army lieutenant says the two officers violated his constitutional rights, and now one of those officers has been fired.
Put your hands out the window!
A Windsor police officer says in his report he spotted a vehicle with dark tinted windows and no license plate displayed that was eluding police. Though a lawsuit says a paper license plate was visible in the rear window of the new car. Nazario admits in his complaint that he didn't immediately pull over, driving nearly 2 minutes with his hazard lights on so he could stop at a well-lit gas station.
What's going on?
Nazario, who is black and Latino and was wearing his military uniform, asks repeatedly why he's being detained.
I'm serving this country and this is how I'm treated.
What's going on? You're fixing to ride the lightning, son.
And then this exchange.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Can I?
Yeah, you should be. Get out. Back up.
Whoa,
Officer Joe Gutierrez then pepper sprays Nazario in the face.
Hold on. That's up.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like you just took a breath and then you turn around and you turn on your TV station and this is what comes up all over again. So it's like this never-ending pain and that reopening of the cut is happening over and over and over again, and it has to stop. And one of the people have to be held accountability. But I guess I'm gonna let Amina go ahead with a question, because I do have a question for you, Dionne, when it comes to accountability as well.
Okay. I just Sorry, I just wanted to jump in really quickly, just to clarify. So when we say everyone has their part to play, I want to make it very clear. Black people can't change the color of their skin.
Correct. Correct.
And so when you have an internal practice that is criminalizing a skin color, it leaves us feeling hopeless and fearful.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I can do many things, but I can't change what I look like. I can't change who I am, right? And that video, the video you just played, here you have a brown body who is a lieutenant in our military, right? Doing nothing wrong. You have officers calling him son or boy. I mean, it's deeper than just comply.
And you wonder if you didn't have enough common sense to drive into a well-lit area, what the outcome of that would have been. You know, it's kind of those kind of things. And as a parent, you are going, you know, you have children, you have young men that you are raising. And when you see a video like that, you can't help but to think about their future. You can't help but to think about yourselves. Like, I can't tell you how many times the moment that there's a cop in the rear view mirror, all of a sudden, you know, that there's something going on deep inside of you that just changed all of a sudden.
That's the truth. And I find myself as a Black woman, as soon as I see a cop, like I'm driving and I see a cop pull someone over, I'm looking to see whether that person is brown or Black. And I'm slowing down because I'm like literally, there was one time I was supposed to get on a highway from my house and they pulled over this kid that looks like, I don't know, maybe he's 19 and they have him sitting on the floor. I literally did not go on the highway. I circled around just to make sure that he was okay. Of course, I wasn't going somewhere where I had to be there at a certain time, but then I was like, that could be my child. And I'm circling around to make sure that this kid is okay and that they're not doing anything wrong to that kid because that kid looks like me or that kid is, and it's sad. And, you know, on the video Monday, the guy said that, I'm afraid to come out. He said, you should be.
Yeah, that's a criminal right there. That's what I mean. That's not a police officer. That's a criminal. How are you telling me I should be afraid right there? For what? For traffic?
But you want to know why? Because the system have shielded them
exactly
for him and has empowered law enforcement to act and say that. That's why
he knows nothing's going to happen.
Listen, whenever there is any kind of a traumatic event or something that rocks you to the core or just scares you, you do one of three things. You either fight, you either flight, or you freeze. And the response or the reaction that you have is going to be based on history for you when bad things happen to you. I will tell you, because it has happened to me. I was coming from church on a Sabbath afternoon and I was pulled over by the police and they told me to turn the car off and drop my keys out of the window. When I tell you, I didn't get into a well-lit area because when I feel trauma, I freeze. I don't run, I don't fight. My entire system shuts down. So I stopped. And for many of us, we will do one of those three things. So for this officer or that was being pulled over, he knew what to do. He remembered what to do. How many of us remember what we should do when we're in a crisis? And so, very long story short, I turned the car off and dropped the keys out. I am shaking. Church people stopped, across the street, a whole line of church people because, you know, they want to know what's going on. They tell me to get out of the car. I ask no questions. And in my mind, of course, when I think about it later, I'm like, I should have did this, I should have did that. But I get out of the car. They ask me, where am I coming from? I tell them where I'm coming from. I'm dressed in a dress and heels. Like, clearly, I did not just commit a crime, right? They put me in the back of the police officer's car so that they can run my place and do all the things that they do. And I kept asking, like, what is this about? So they asked me for my registration. And of course, that was the day I couldn't find it. But because I was so scared, I forgot where I put it. So all of that could have gone south because then it could have been seen to them or perceived to them as something else. Well, they then told me they thought my car was stolen. Someone called in my plates and they thought it was stolen, so they pulled me over. At the time, I had a silver Honda Accord with, it was a sports car, so the tires are bigger, the rims are bigger, and the car is tinted. So I'm pretty sure they thought there was other activity happening in that car, and that's what they pulled me over. But by the time I got out and they saw who I was and they were talking to me, it was too late to be like, okay, well, just get in the car and go. They had to almost finish what they were doing. And I got no paper. I got nothing in writing. I got nothing like that said. It was just like, okay, well, you can go. We're sorry for the misunderstanding. And they could have gotten fired for what they did, but I wasn't thinking. And the point I'm trying to bring up is when we are pulled over, and especially females, we are so traumatized by what we're seeing on the news that we think it's automatically going to happen to us because what makes us different than the other person? We're the same skin color. So there should also be, as we're talking about it and holding police accountable, there needs to be some education to help us to minimize some of the anxiety that comes up when we're pulled over.
And you know what, to add to what you said, I mean, I had my own experience back, I think it's 1991, and actually was an undergrad at Seton Hall. So I used to babysit for this Jewish couple in Shore Hills. If anybody knows anything about Shore Hills, New Jersey, it's a very affluent area. And of course, the couple would be going out. So I usually leave their house like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I got pulled over for doing nothing, and the cop asked me where I was coming from. And I said, well, I was babysitting. And he's like, what, where, whose family? And I'm telling him, now, mind you, 1991, you don't have a cell phone. I'm like, okay, this man's going to kill me. And he's like, what are you doing here? Let me see your license. It's like, oh, you live in Elizabeth. Why are you in Shore Hills? And I had to give him all this information. And he's like, okay, he went and did whatever he had to do in his car, and he came back. He was like, all right, don't let me see you here again. Now, I'll tell you, the Shore Hill couple, and I remember I cried because I was in school. Like, I was doing everything right that you ask of an immigrant, like everything right. And I remember the Shore Hill couple that I babysat for, when they called me again, I explained the situation. They did tell me, lovely, lovely couple. They said, did you get his shield? I was like, listen, I was by myself. It was Saturday night. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I was not even trying to look at the cop in the eye. Like, I'm trying to save my life. There's no cell phone. You know, it wasn't the cell phone age. It wasn't the camera age. I'm just really trying to I'm like, okay, this one's going to kill me. No one was around. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I know they were very, very upset to the point that they said they were going to try and find out who was on duty. And I said, no, I didn't want to get into any trouble. I said, no. And I told them, if possible, can I get off like 11 p.m.? So again, it's going back to, I put myself in a certain way just so I don't get into that situation again. And instead of making them feel accountable, because I feel like if they went back and something happened, then my family or myself would be in trouble. So you just do what you need to do. And I think we were raised to just even in that area, even during the day, you knew once you got to that Shore Hills area, even if you were doing 30, do 25 because you're Black, even during the day, they're going to stop you. And we were just raised that way, and we don't want to be confrontational. You just do what you need to do and you just deal with it. But it is something that we need to take further, because it's not enough to just do what we need to do so then they don't bother us, because apparently it's not working. It's not working.
Listen, even when we're doing what we're supposed to do, and the cop car pulls up behind me, I freeze. I turn the radio down because I'm like, oh my gosh, is the radio too loud? I start doing things. Yes, because I don't want to be another statistic because I'm Black. I can't, like Dionne said, I can't change my skin color. I could do other things. I could change my hair. I could make it look more straighter, but I can't change my skin color. I am who I am, and I should not be subjected to fear because of that. But the reality of our society, and especially now, is that we are. This trial gave us a minute to just really exhale. And for the first time, we can say, well, it was public. And hopefully some police officer will think twice before doing what he's accustomed to doing, or some criminal police officer will think twice before doing what he's accustomed to doing. But I can't rely on that, because at the end of the day, I am still Black.
Agreed. I totally agree with you. And even my kids, I have kids that are 21, 22, 23. And I'm just like, I cannot wait for them to get to their 30s, because I just feel like the 20s is so volatile, where they're not little kids where you can hold their hand and protect them. So you have to let them go. They're not in their 30s, 40s, where they have their own family, where they truly understand, you know what, my job is to protect my family. My kids are the new generation where they want to talk, they want to speak out. And we're like, listen, please don't speak out. Please don't talk. Please just, you know what, just shut up, put your hands up. Like, don't try whatever you know of self-sufficiency, trying to do the other way when it comes to somebody pulling you over. And it's alarming to a parent. It's extremely alarming.
It is.
You know,
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, I had a question for Dionne. So I didn't want to sort of abruptly stop this discussion, because it's a really good question to keep going.
It's okay.
So, but go ahead. I'll wait on my question.
No, I was going to make a statement. Chris Cuomo said on his show, the only way police reform will stop, let me quote him correctly. Chris Cuomo said police reform won't happen until white people, kids, start getting killed. So do you think that statement is accurate, or he's just talking?
I mean, let's just keep it real. As professional as I am, it's factual. Like, these instances, like, we are all right. Black people are like commodities in this country, right? I don't care how professional you are. I don't care what your title is. And I'm talking about myself. A lot of individuals in society view us as commodities that are tradable. We're replaceable. Our lives don't matter. Things of that nature. And so once these issues start affecting the communities that society is set up to protect, then it's going to be like, pump the brakes. What can we do to address it? Because let's not forget, remember the crack epidemic and what drugs did to our Black communities, and even how certain kinds of drugs, they were sentenced differently, right? You had much harsher crimes for the drugs that were in Black communities, and much lower slaps on the wrist for drugs that were in white communities, right? So we have this dichotomy. We saw that it destroyed the Black community. It destroyed our Black families. It put our men in jail. And here I am 5 years ago, and there's this opioid crisis. And I'm like, oh, well, that's a really interesting thing. Considering that it wasn't a crisis before, but now we have to figure out how to treat these families. And now we have to figure out how to provide the counseling they need to overcome this addiction.
And don't
forget, so you see how society treated two sets of people differently. And so while I know people were shocked by Cuomo's statement, his sentiments are correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I had a question.
Yeah. So with all of that being said, Dionne, do you think that ending qualified immunity could really have an impact on police reform? Or is there even an alternative to that?
Before you answer that, Dionne, would you maybe tell what qualified immunity is? Because some people might not know, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And I think this is another great teachable moment, because people hear it, but I don't think they understand conceptually what it is. So qualified immunity, let me just start by saying, is not immunity from criminal charges against police officers, right? Some people seem to think like officers are not held responsible criminally because of qualified immunity. That is false. Qualified immunity, essentially what it does is it shields officers financially, right, from being responsible for instances of, excessive force, things of that nature, right? So basically, they are shielded from financial liability. Qualified immunity basically says, man, you did this deed, you use excessive force, there's going to be a potential civil judgment, but you're not going to be personally responsible for that, right? And I think what that does, this concept is officers know for the most part, we can look at the stats, for the most part, they're not going to be convicted criminally for these actions. They know under qualified immunity, when these cases, if they go federal or there's a concern there, that they're not going to be held financially liable either. Mm-hmm. And so in my opinion, it's almost like a 1-2 punch. It's like, I'm not going to be caught criminally. It's not going to affect my pockets. It's not going to affect anything financially to do with me. I'm not going to have to pay for my misconduct. And it kind of creates this comfort, this blanket of safety. And so I think if qualified immunity is removed, if it is no longer at play, I know for some people, look, I can't speak for y'all, but people could do a lot of things for me, but don't come for my pockets, right? Do not come for my wallet. And so I think if there is a chance of financial liability, personally, some, not all, some people won't care. Some will probably shift the way they think in these cases where they're using excessive force.
I mean, for me personally, I believe it's a need. And I agree with you. I think when it comes to dealing with this on a personal level, I think what's happening is, and I have to say this because when we talk about qualified immunity, I kind of look at it in this way. I remember growing up when I used to play ball, we win as a team, we lose as a team. I really feel that this is a good concept because let's say I'm in a particular district and I'm a police officer, and if I'm acting a certain way and I know what's going to happen to me is not just going to affect me, but it's going to affect my entire police force, I may have to look at things differently. A lot of times when we see things happening, the other officers usually are just standing and watching it, right? Mm-hmm. But imagine if now they are thinking, if I allow this cop or this criminal to continue acting like a cop right now, he's going to take money out of my pockets. And that means I have kids that I have to pay for college education that I'm not going to be able to provide for. I have a mortgage that I'm not going to be able to pay. They might think differently now because now what you do affects not just you, but it affects the entire department. And I'm thinking, I mean, this is not a quick fix and all of a sudden everybody's going to behave. The criminals are always going to be like criminals, but at least they're going to be held accountable by their peers. Number one, there's something powerful about being held accountable by your peers to begin with. And number two, is going to hit you where it matters the most. So I do feel we definitely need to keep pushing that because it's a need. It's a need. I heard what the governor said, but I don't think we need to wait till it gets to that level for changes to take place. If we start hitting them where it matters, changes will have to take place. Otherwise, guess what? The police force is going to crumble and may have to be replaced by something else.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, just to close off the qualified immunity conversation. What people have to understand is that the case law that created this concept, the federal case law, is very archaic, and it offers broad protection for police officers. Broad protection, right? What people have to understand is that force is going to be a component of law enforcement duties, right? Force is a part of the job. What we're talking about, though, is excessive force, which was on clear display in the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. And even in instances where there are injuries to individuals, serious injuries committed by law enforcement, qualified immunity generally protects officers. Like, I mean, it goes to the extreme to protect them. And so, having said that, this is an area I think we need to look at realistically, right? And really need to start having strong conversations. Because as I mentioned, it almost provides that second layer of protection. So.
Yeah. Well, let's take a deep break. We'll take a break and we will be right back. Here on the remedy, still dealing with this topic, processing the Derek Chauvin trial, and much more than that. We are really shifting now, if I may, into something that's dear to me. And as you heard before, Dionne just mentioned how in this country that the police have been given the legal right to use force up to and including deadly force in order to maintain peace and order. And a lot of times, so especially in the news, when we've watched a lot of times when they stop us, it usually begins with a traffic stops and slash a pursuit. What I wanted to ask, we have a mental health therapist on board today, and what I wanted to ask her is this. Earlier, she mentioned the trauma that we all experience. Can you talk a little bit about that physical trauma that we all experience when we get stopped by the police, and how can we, if there's a way we can begin to practice how to eliminate that stress so that we can function in a way that may be beneficial to us, if I'm making sense.
So actually, as you asked the question, I could feel physiologically my pressure was going up. I could feel, my hands started to get clammy a little bit, because when we're in situations that tend to bring on fear to us, our bodies respond a certain way. So it's not only just our behaviors, but there are things that happen to us. And if we step out of thinking about the trial or thinking about the murder, because if we as a society, as an individual, had never experienced trauma before, we experienced it when we saw George Floyd getting killed. That 9 minutes that played on that 6 o'clock news, that breaking news, that social media was the first imprint of the trauma. And then fast forward, almost 300 and something days later, the trial started. It re-traumatized us all over again. And for many of us, we have our own stuff before the trial, right? We have gone through things that have become sort of a part of who we are. And we have gone through things that have been titled or categorized as trauma. So when we see something like that, while we may not have been in that particular situation, it brings back those physiological feelings of when we had our own stuff happening to us. And, I think I'm going to just take a step back and just kind of explain what trauma is, because we hear, oh my goodness, I'm so traumatized. We hear that often and we throw that term around. But trauma is literally something that rocks the bottom of your foundation. If you think of an earthquake and you think of something that happens and you actually lose your footing, and some of us, we don't even fall back with our 2 feet flat. Some of us, we fall like this, and it takes professionals to help even the playing field back for us. And that is what trauma is. And so trauma is an event that happens. It's not a feeling. It's not a reaction. It is an event that happens, and we respond a certain way to the event. And so it's the same thing if you're driving in a car and there's 2 people in the car and you have a car accident, right? And it could be something from a small fender bender to something like a major accident where the car is totaled, and maybe even someone dies in the accident. The people in that car, while they experience the very same thing, their responses are always going to be different because of our history of how we deal with crises, how we deal with certain things. We call that resiliency, right? Your level of how you can bounce back quick is going to determine what happens when you're in a crisis. So earlier I talked about, the 3, I call them the 3 F's because it's fight, flight, or freeze. Depending again on how you handle things is what's going to happen to you in that moment. And Monday, I'm so passionate about what I'm talking about that I actually forgot your question, but I know you were asking about fight, fleet, and freeze. And I think you had asked about like, how do we cope and what do we do? How do we deal with it?
Correct.
So there are multiple things that we can do to deal with it, but dealing with it doesn't happen on that day. Like you have to almost continuously work on how you're going to manage stress, how you're going to manage anxiety, how you're going to manage crises when they come. And so there's a big push on this whole mindfulness, which is really like meditation or yoga or just getting centered, finding your grounding, whatever that looks like, and staying present in the moment. And so breathing, as we may or may not, I don't think we take it for granted anymore after hearing I can't breathe. Breathing is something that definitely helps to keep the physiological symptoms of stress and anxiety at a low. And just staying calm. Most of us, you may look at us and we could be and look calm on the outside, but on the inside, we're enraged. And sometimes that enraged feeling can seep through, which then poses a threat for the people who we're interacting with. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I guess for when I'm listening to you and you're providing some excellent exercises for us to do, I'm thinking, and I can speak for the police department, and one of these days we will bring some officers into this show so that they can help us understand. I can't help but to think about, again, some of the confrontation that takes place, and I'm using the word confrontation. Why is it that most of the time when we see interaction between us and police officers, we don't necessarily see negotiation? We see more or less confrontation. And when people are confronted, and again, I'm going back to you, Amina, what happened to us psychologically when you feel like you're being confronted by an exterior force? What kind of reactions arise within us? And if so, how do we, again, I'm trying to teach us how to stay alive, if that's even making sense. How do we learn to deal with that? Because different people deals with confrontation differently. I'm thinking from a police standpoint, they are trained to learn how to handle a moment where everything is chaotic around them. They're supposed to maintain some kind of level of professionalism. But what I'm hearing on the news nowadays is like they are acting just as bad as we are acting. They all of a sudden they don't remember which one is the gun and which one is the taser. You know, it's those kind of things you're hearing on the news. So I'm wondering what's happening in the minds as you are exposed to this kind of environment where negotiation is not happening, but confrontation is what's being pulled from the police officers.
So as I hear you talking, I have like 10,000 things running through my head. So let me just see if I could explain some of it. First of all, when police officers are called to a scene, so let's go with that scenario, that they're called to a scene. Usually they come and they match the level of the scene. And the level of the scene is if there's already confrontation happening, they're coming in with that mindset. Now, when that happens, oftentimes the victim is feeling, or the person that the police is sort of confronting, is almost feeling that this is something I need to protect myself, because right now there's no one here to protect me. And this goes back to how we deal with crises, right? How we deal with the crisis, because at the end of the day, this police officer doesn't know what I've been through. I don't know what this police officer has been through. So now you have two people who have a history who are coming together, right, in the space. And depending on how you manage conflict is going to play itself out in this space. Mm-hmm. But nobody wants to be a punk. And I use the word punk because in our communities, in Black and Brown communities, we always have to fight for everything. Nothing comes easy for us.
Yep.
Like, look, I'm talking to you right now and I'm like hyped. And I shouldn't be. I should be calm. We should be having this really nice conversation. But it does something in me because I feel like we're always fighting.
All right.
Do we always have to fight? Because when we look in our communities, we fight each other. So how is it that we fight each other and then we invite the police in, and then it's a problem when they use the same kind of things that we use on each other on us? And there was a time where we were talking about Black on Black crime, and we were saying how bad it was and we needed to stop it. And these are all the things we needed to do. And I call what's happening in our world right now distractions, right? The distractions set in, and all of a sudden, boom, we're focusing on something else. This whole thing happened at the peak or the brink of the pandemic. And we are still in the pandemic. And people have lost their jobs. People are struggling. So they are doing whatever they think they need to do to survive. I'm not saying that the things that they're doing is legit. I'm not saying the things that they're doing is things that they should be doing, but it puts them in a position to be just like a George Floyd. And then when that happens, what do we as a community do? So we're talking now about like how to protect us from not being a George Floyd, but this conversation needs to go like way back. Yeah. And we don't have the time today to do it. We don't have the energy today to do it, but there are conversations and there are tables that need to be set, and different kinds of people need to come around the table to talk about it, because time waits for no man. Children are being born every day. People are growing up every day. And as these kids who are babies who know nothing now grow up, they will learn to survive. And so ultimately, it goes to, in the Black and Brown communities, we have to survive. Yeah. And in order to survive, we almost have to be tough, because when we're not, we get taken advantage of, we get bullied, all of these things happen. So when the officer shows up on the scene and there's something happening, or even not, you get pulled over because they said you ran the red light, but you know you didn't run the red light, and now you're trying to explain yourself that you didn't run the red light, and it quickly escalates. How do we begin to do we not argue? Do we not, give our point of view? Are we seen as weak if we let them just kind of talk all over us and talk over us? So there's just so much of what battles do we pick and choose? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we want to be right because we've been wrong for so long.
We've been told that we are wrong for so long, not necessarily because we are wrong. You know what I mean?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think too. Before you continue, because I'm like here enjoying this. I'm like, yes, girl. I think to answer the questions, what do we do? So in the past, I had a couple of presentations similar to this, where individuals will ask, well, what do we do in interactions with law enforcement? And the one thing I tell individuals, don't argue with the officer. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm an attorney, right? Let your case get to court, and whatever needs to be dealt with, let the attorneys argue it out. Let us hash it out, right? Because we see we're not in an atmosphere or environment where we would survive an argument. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, right? There isn't nothing that we're doing. You know what I mean? So it's so hard. Armina, I completely understand the questioning. Is like, what do we do? Especially when in many instances, we're not doing anything wrong. And it's almost like the response is just pray and hope for the best, which is unfortunate.
Dionne, I understand. I totally understand what you're saying. Let the attorneys deal with it, because, our life matters, and going back and forth with the cop. But you have to also understand that the person is thinking, I can't lose my job. I can't take a day off. I don't have money for an attorney. So all this thing, it's not easy to get an attorney. It's not easy to take the day off to go to back and forth with, to talk to your attorney, to go to court. And how much, sometimes you go to court, the court postpone it and you didn't even get the letter. And then, so there's all this thing in our community as well that does not give us the opportunity to say, okay, you know what, we'll just let our attorney deal with it. It's unfortunately, it's not like that for us.
And that is a real, like what you mentioned is real for people. Unfortunately, what this environment have created for me in the last, I would say 3 years or so, many of my friends have me on speed dial, right? Like if they're ever pulled over, even if it's for like
having you on speed dial, even though I don't know.
Even if they're pulled over for, traffic, a little light is out, and what they do is they automatically call me. They put me on speakerphone. People have put me on FaceTime, and let the officer know, look, this is my attorney. She's on the phone. Generally, I let the officer do what they do. I'd really have to interject, and just having that presence, like on the phone, changes a lot of the dynamic. So that's my other suggestion. Find the baddest attorney that's your friend.
Yes.
And beg them to be a resource. Like, hey, can I just give you a call if I'm pulled over?
Yeah. I like that idea, but I have to intervene again. So, we're kind of told, once you see an officer, pull over, let them see your hands. Like, your hands should be where it's visible. Mm-hmm. Definitely not, for me, I wouldn't want to try to even make a phone call.
Yeah.
Like, you want your hand visible. So if your hand is visible, do I have to tell the officer I need to make a phone call? Which they'll probably say no. So I guess at what moment can you bring your attorney in without making it seem like you're doing something that might cause you your life?
If you here is where being an iPhone user versus an Android user comes in. Because once you see them lights, hey Siri, call Dionne Kelly.
Yeah.
Calling Dionne Kelly.
Oh my goodness.
It works.
So my phone actually does. Okay.
Yes, it works.
But you see, like you guys saw my hands. I just called it out in the car and I'm on the line. So I mean, like I said, these are just some suggestions to make people feel.
And I'm going back and forth just to bring some of potential stuff that we have to deal with, but we have to educate ourselves. These are great things that you're telling us.
Yeah.
But can I just also jump in and say that these behaviors mostly started years ago when something was happening within the family structure and it wasn't dealt with. And then Mary or Johnny went to school and started acting out in school. And the school didn't take the time to figure out what's really going on. And then Johnny or Mary got labeled, and that label followed them as a oppositional, defiant person throughout their childhood. Now they're in high school and they have learning disabilities or learning challenges because they never resolved the trauma from the childhood. And so I want to say that it doesn't just start in that moment when you're pulled over. We all walk around with baggages and history. And if we're not digging into those bags, if we're not taking the suitcase, taking the clothes out, looking at the one that doesn't fit, giving it away or throwing it out, we just keep carrying these old clothes or these old things that have happened to us, never addressing them, and expect that they just will magically go away. And it doesn't. It shows up in other ways, and we react in other ways based on our history.
Exactly. I would like to touch base on that. Thursday we had an ex parte. So when you have an ex parte, that means the judge sign off that your child has to be taken away and they have to come into foster care. So in order for us to do that, we have to get police involved. So I called the non-emergency phone call, and I asked for a deputy to escort me to the house, because you're taking a child, two children away from their parents, and then you bring them two strangers, and they didn't know it was happening, and you don't know how they're going to react. Mm-hmm. And you guys, based on the temper of the country, how the George Floyd situation happened, you work with police hand in hand, but you don't know when things gonna go south. So of course I was with a colleague, and we're sitting there. I present the ex parte to the parent, and they're like, "No, you can't take my child away." And the officer say, "Hey, no, we here. The judge signed a paper where you have to give us your kid." And the mom and dad were starting to be a bit, I didn't want to say aggressive, upset. And then thank God the officer was calm enough. She's like, "Okay, I understand you you're getting upset, but it is the judge order. Let me come in and discuss it with you." And while we were talking, we heard sirens coming around, like, "Oh my gosh, is it going south?" So we're moving ourselves from the door in case something happened that involved, they're drawing their guns or anything. So at that moment, I was afraid not to know, hey, I don't know what's going to happen. We heard sirens. We hear them being loud in the home. And I'm like, okay. And then finally they came out. I'm like, okay, everything is calm. But it broke my heart to see that at that moment, I didn't trust that the cops would have done something. If something had gone south, like even their lives or my life would have been protected. So, I mean, I understand what we're saying. I work with them. And at the same time, I don't trust them. That's the sad part.
Armina, I have a question for you that's like burning a hole in my psyche.
Oh, gosh.
So I'm sure we all heard of the concept of defunding the police. That has different meanings for different people, but I think the general consensus is not getting rid of the police department, but reallocating resources to have other services in place. Other services like mental health professionals to go on calls, social workers, things of that nature. What are your thoughts about that? Not the concept of defunding the police per se, but reallocating resources for mental health services.
I mean, the short answer is it's needed. That's a very short answer. But what does that even look like? And what kinds of threat would that pose to the police departments? I am in Philadelphia. And so in Philadelphia, there has been quite a few conversations. Matter of fact, there are tables where mental health, the police departments, chiefs are all sitting at this table trying to figure this out. When George Floyd's death first took place, Philadelphia residents, many of them decided to respond in a way that was full of hurt and pain, right? And I forget what office in Philadelphia, but they created like a meeting, like a Zoom meeting for about 70 people to come on. And I was I think I was the only mental health person on the panel to kind of talk about what we as professionals, mental health professionals, could bring to the table to help. And one of the things that we have a way of doing is to really de-escalate the situation. Like, that's our training. That's, when Cynthia was talking about the 15-year-old who came in and, the group could not get him to de-escalate. But then they did, because that's our training. Like, that's what we are trained to do. And so if we can partner up with the police department in doing so, I don't know what that looks like, but I do think funds need to be allocated and shifted around so that mental health can support the police department or law enforcement on crisis things. I have a couple of friends who are police officers, and there are trainings for police officers in mental health. And I don't know if it's like a color band on their gun or a color band on their taser that lets each other know that this person is more trained in mental health. And so they try to pair the teams up that way. But I've seen it before where, I used to run a partial program, and there have been times where we had to call the police because children were unsafe. I was involved in a situation where a young lady tried to jump off of a fire escape. Well, me nor my team was equipped to pull her off the fire escape when we're literally holding on for dear life so that she doesn't jump off while someone else is calling the police. So the police show up and they instantly go to put her into a hold. And I'm like, no, there's trauma. If you touch her, she's going to flip out. It's going to get worse. And I'm doing this in like 10,000 speed so that it doesn't happen. What happens? It happened. What happened? She flipped out to the point where she and I are now in the back of a police car going to get evaluated. And so it can work if the systems work together and understand that each other have a different role. Not one is not coming to take over the other's role, but we're working together. So there will have to be a lot of training that would take place for it to be successful. But I agree that it should happen.
It's a beautiful conversation. I wish we could continue that conversation for the entire day. But unfortunately, for everything, there is a beginning and there is an end. And at this point, I just want to literally just take a moment to say how grateful I am to both Amina and Dionne for responding positively and coming to our show today and really help us to, again, this is just the beginning of the conversation, one of many conversations that we need to have. This is going on Facebook, on YouTube, and if you are a police officer and you are interested in joining the conversation, we actually want to do a show with police officers. Again, and as you guys mentioned it earlier, it's not a one side thing, that we need to bring both sides together. We may not agree on everything that you say. We may disagree with you. We may even be angry at you, but we still want to talk with you. And so our doors are open. The numbers are open.
And not all police officers are, like you explained, are criminals. So we do appreciate the work that they do.
Yeah, and it's hard. Like I was just telling you earlier in our conversation, Pat, how difficult I think it would be for a police officer to identify someone with mental illness. If they are not trained to do that, there's a way that you have to handle someone with mental illness, and their behavior may not necessarily be criminal behavior. So, but if they don't know how to do it, their hands are already on their guns and they're getting ready to pull out and shoot, then there's a problem. Amina?
But I was just going to say, I need 2 seconds to talk about children, because we talked earlier about that How do we talk to our children about what's going on?
Yes,
Most of us will avoid the conversation because it's easier and comfortable. But I just want to tell you all, do not avoid the conversation. We have to talk about with our children about colors. I remember it happens, you look in a book and you're talking to a toddler and like, this is a green tree and this is a red apple. You're identifying colors in this book, but we don't talk about the different shades of people. And so what we're doing is teaching our children to be colorblind, but that doesn't work for us, right? We need to be educating them on that people are different and what differences look like. Because ultimately, if we don't have the conversation with them, we then allow them to absorb society's racial stereotypes. And that, my friends, we do not want. Yeah. So that is like one of the many things I can give you, but have conversations about differences. It makes it easier to explain racism versus saying, when someone that doesn't look like you, well, what does that look like? Because in Black and brown communities, we have different shades. We don't all look alike. And so we need to start talking about differences and pointing out differences. Because if my daughter's like, if she points at someone and says, oh, look, they're different, I'm like, put your hand down, don't do that, right? But if she's like, oh, look, a yellow bird, or oh, look, there's a blue car, I'm like, yes, you know your colors. It needs to be the same thing. We need to be talking to our children about differences, because this will indicate to them that we notice that there are differences and there's nothing wrong with being different, but you need to sort of move around in your differences. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Diversity should be inclusive, not frowned upon.
Yeah. Yeah. And so also don't sugarcoat racism or police violence. Have that conversation as we have done today. Emphasize the good as well. Not every police officer is bad. You can emphasize the good. And also something else that affects, sometimes we forget, we need to empower kids to come up with solutions as well, because this Generation Z, it's something else. I'm telling you, it's amazing.
They need to be at the table. They need to be at the tables having conversations too. And, not to mention, we all witnessed a murder. We all saw someone die. And when the trial happened, it was replayed again. And we all rewatched it and had, if not more intense feelings, we had those feelings again. Find a therapist to check your thinking. No one's saying that you're quote unquote crazy. Just go talk to some, is what I'm feeling something that is normal? Is what I'm feeling something that I should look a little deeper into? Most therapists in this pandemic are offering a one-time free session or a couple of time free sessions, just so that you can gain your footing. I mean, this has been something that has rocked our nation. So some of the things that you're feeling, trust and believe, you're not alone. A lot of us are feeling it too.
Yeah, I have a quick joke for you guys before we leave. So I was asked if I'm Black. So I'm told that I'm not Black, but I'm just a shade of dark that they call chocolate indulgence. So if you go to Home Depot, you might find out exactly what that is.
Can I say something? Yes. For us Black and brown people, I'm happy to see people like Dionne and people like Amina, and I know Cynthia, you are a therapist, Monday, you're a therapist. There are a lot of us in these fields now. So, and I know that we will continue to seek people, but seek out to us. The best thing that we can do for each other is educate each other. We need to keep educating each other. And if you don't trust a Caucasian person or person that does not look like you, it's okay, because there's starting to be a whole lot of us that are within these fields, and we need to go out to our communities. I think Dionne said she makes presentation so people know what they need to do. Or Mina, you're doing similar stuff. We need to educate each other. I think something like, including myself, what is it? Equality, quality immunity. I honestly didn't even know that existed until the whole George Floyd thing. So there's a whole lot that we don't know. Like I said, people know what you need to know, in your field, or if somebody in your family is in that field, then you hear it all the time. But there's a lot that we don't know when you don't know much about, what a certain field does. Just because, it's not in your face, you just don't know. So
Correct.
I'm always about, let's try to educate each other. There's enough of us that look the same that we can trust, that can give us some information and hopefully help us if we all in a position that can be a problem in whatever sector it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Amina, let's start with you. There are things people still don't know. You do have your own firm, and if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yes, so it is candorconsultingfirm.com. I am on Instagram as Mrs. Domingue, mrs.domingue, and I am on Facebook as Mia, MIA Naomi. Long story for another day. Maybe what you can do is type it in the chat box so that everyone can see,
Sure.
that will watch this later.
Sure. If please do that right now before we log out. And Miss Dionne, same question. If someone were to wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
I am on Facebook as Dionne Kelly. I am on Instagram. My Instagram handle, which I'll also type in the box, but it's Dionne. That's DIONNEM. M as in Mary _ESQ. Okay. So those are like my two major handles. Facebook is like where I am the majority of the time. So if you really want to get in contact with me, hit me up on Facebook.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And Cynthia and our scientist Pat and everybody else who took the time to watch the show today, we appreciate you. We want to say thank you so much. Today was a productive day. Amen. So before you go, I just want to make sure I put down your guys' information on the chat real quick. And while we're at it, I want to say a special happy birthday to a cousin of mine. Diane is actually just celebrated birthday last Wednesday. So happy belated birthday, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you. It feels good to be 21. Finally, I'm 21 years old.
Yes, you get to drink. Yes.
Right. Finally.
And also my cousin, she's having her birthday tomorrow. Miriam Elize Williams. So we want to wish you a happy birthday as well. And for all of you who are watching, maybe you do have a birthday coming up that I know nothing about. We just want to say happy birthday to you as well. All right. So guys, like I said, thank you so much. We're going to get out of here, but I want to make sure that the information.
Monday, your father has a birthday on Monday.
Yes, I need a fish.
How you forget your dad? And don't they watch your show?
Yes, my father watched the show. Pat,
that's a shame.
You are an angel. Listen, it's not a shame. My dad is a wolf man. Okay, he can handle this. He's not gonna be mad or anything like that. Dad, if you're watching the show, when you are watching the show, we just want to say we love you. Happy birthday. We will see you on Monday. That's it, right, Pat? Nobody else's birthday that I'm forgetting.
Wow. Well, my birthday is on Thursday.
Auntie Nelly?
Yeah.
Well, she doesn't watch the show, but happy birthday, Auntie Nelly.
Her kids watch the show Monday.
Her kids watch the show. Oh, man. You are getting me in trouble today with the family.
Getting yourself in trouble.
Right.
Listen, let's get out of here. Can we pray together before we go? Father God, we just want to say thank you so much for allowing us to come together as a family and share our knowledge with each other and with the world. Lord, there is so much to be done, and we need your guidance. We need your Holy Spirit to continue to enable us to do the good that we can do, to be our brother's keeper. Help us, Father God. Help us, and please bless those who are celebrating their birthdays. May they be blessed with many, many, many more. We thank you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for being part of the family.
Yes.
All right. See you guys. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.